Chris 6 News has obtained police documents from the Gillette Murders nearly 4 decades ago. In this digital exclusive, we start with a statement given to police by James Garland Harris, also known as Gary Harris. It was Friday night when Gary Harris gets a ping on his pager to call his friend Gary Gillette. Harris had just left a party with a girl named Michelle, calls Mr. Gillette back, and agrees to go over to his house for a drink. When he arrives, Mr. Gillette has Gary follow him to the garage where he was replacing the hinges off the kitchen door. Says to him it's easier to pick the lock with a knife rather than removing the hinges, and shows him. Mr. Gillette is at home alone after telling Harris that his wife, Stephanie Gillette, is still at a Christmas party they were both at. After a night of drinking, Harris decides to stay and spend the night with his date at the Gillette's house, until Harris says he hears Stephanie arrive and get into a fight with Mr. Gillette. He then decides to leave with his date. After forgetting her coat, he goes back, picks the locks with his knife, goes inside to get her coat, and then leaves. It isn't until Saturday morning when he tried to call Mr. Gillette and no answer. Even the answering service telling Harris they couldn't find Mr. Gillette. Harris goes back to the house Sunday morning, notices the garage door is open, and Mr. Gillette's Buick is missing. That is when he calls police, waits for an officer to arrive, and goes into the home by picking the lock, later finding the bodies inside their bedroom. According to a police report written by Officer Dan Bach, who assisted Harris in entering the Gillette's home, he decided to enter the home for a welfare check. Harris, also an off-duty constable, told Officer Bach the door was easy to open. So Officer Bach slipped the lock and they entered. Both walking down the hallway, Harris turned into Mr. Gillette's room, saying, "Oh no." That is where Officer Bach saw Stephanie and Gary Gillette laying beside the bed. According to the police document, Harris repeated, "I don't believe it." That is when Officer Bach called for backup and stated they would treat this as a homicide, putting a bolo, also known as a be on the lookout, for Mr. Gillette's Buick, which was later found 6 minutes away on Wimbledon Drive. When more officers started to arrive on the scene, they describe how they found the couple. One officer stating he saw both bodies partially naked, Mr. Gillette in his underwear with only a gold watch on his left hand, and Mrs. Gillette only in her underwear and white socks. According to a statement from Officer Messer, Stephanie Gillette had hair clutched in her left hand. The bodies twisted and intertwined on the side of the bed, with lots of blood on the left side of the bed and on the carpet by the bodies. Describing extreme damage to Stephanie's face, with 2 stab wounds on her chest. Mr. Gillette suffering from damage to his head and 3 stab wounds to the back. While searching and documenting for evidence around the home, officials finding blood on a kitchen knife and a hatchet with blood and hair between the top and bottom mattress in the guest bedroom, which will later be identified as a murder weapon. But it wouldn't be until May 31st, 1986, almost 5 months later, that police charged someone for the crime, charging James Garland Harris for the murders of Gary and Stephanie Gillette. The DA would later drop the charges for not having enough evidence. But what did police have? During a search warrant of Gary Harris's home, police documents show officers found a picture of a female believed to be Rodana Fickus, who will later give police a statement on Harris, a legal pad with writing on it, the book They Call Me the Catch Me Killer, 2 adult magazines, 2 empty beer cans with what appears to be blood on them, which investigators in the lab later confirm not to be blood, and 4 pictures of a female in a bikini believed to be Stephanie Gillette. While the investigation continued, a tip comes into the police department to look into a man named David Stevens, a good friend of Gary Harris. Police then get a statement from a woman named Pamela Sue Palmer, who lived in Portland at the time and was dating David. She states David used to work for Mr. Gillette, and on the Friday night Harris last sees Mr. Gillette alive, David doesn't show up to pick her up from work. She finally talks to David on Sunday morning, telling her how he was looking for the Gillettes after Gary contacted him that they couldn't be reached. Palmer and David head over to the Gillette's home on Sunday morning, where they find the house swarmed by police. Palmer states in her written report, David later tells her the bodies were found in a comfortable position and how they messed up Stephanie's face. They must have had a grudge on her, or she was being hysterical, and told Palmer Stephanie lived for 5 hours after being attacked. She states the information came from Gary Harris because he was the one telling David everything he knew. When police show Palmer the hatchet, the murder weapon found inside the home, Palmer confirms the hatchet was in fact hers and was in her garage. At the time, she was seeing David Stevens when the murders happened, but didn't know how it would have ended up at the scene. Investigators even traveling to San Antonio to confirm the hatchet was Palmer's grandmother's, which she states was given to her. The medical examiner who performed autopsies on Stephanie and Gary Gillette state both died from traumatic injuries to their head and chest. And in his professional opinion, both died at the same time, never telling any family member that Stephanie had lived for 5 hours after she was assaulted. In November of 1987, charges for Gary Harris were dropped. And until this day, the mystery of who killed Stephanie and Gary Gillette remain 39 years later.